God. We are live streaming and recording. If you don't mind just giving me just a couple more minutes.
Thank you, Cindy.
Oh, good. Dan's joining.
Okay, full up. The applicant still is not muted and still has video on.
Okay, so George, I'm going to go ahead and mute you, and I'm going to turn off your video. And then when the item comes on, I will unmute you and turn your video on. Did you hear me?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, George, I'm talking to you. I'm going to go ahead and mute you, and I'm going
Sound
to
is
turn
on.
off your video until your item comes on.
Wanted to turn it off?
Okay, the second interpreter should be coming on any minute. I would give it just 2 more minutes if you don't mind.
Sure. Hey, Dan, just so you know, I'm getting notices that my internet connection is unstable. So if I go out completely, Cindy will turn it over to you. Until
Okay.
I'm able to come back on. Assuming I'm able to come back on.
Okay. Good
Cindy?
luck.
Cindy,
Yes?
this is Marcy. Claudia's been trying to get in and she says it's not letting her get in.
Can she join as an attendee?
Okay, I will tell her to do so.
And then I'll just promote her. Oh, here we go. Okay.
Any luck, Cindy?
Marcia, it's kind of odd. I've added you both. And I'm not being allowed to start. Let me try adding you one more time. Give me a minute.
Okay.
Okay, now we're okay. Almost there. Adding Claudia. All right, Spanish interpretation has started.
Okay. Thank you and good evening. Thank you for attending the October 5th, 2021 regular meeting of the St. Helena Planning Commission. There's a paragraph I need to read before we get started here, so if you will. This meeting will be conducted pursuant to the provisions of Government Code Section 54953 as amended by AB 361, which authorizes teleconference meetings under the Brown Act during certain proclaimed states of emergency. California proclaimed a state of emergency related to COVID-19 4th, 2020. Conference meeting is necessary so that the city can conduct essential business and is permitted under Government Code 54953 in order to protect public health and safety of attendees. Consistent with Government Code Section 54953, this Planning Commission meeting will be held via teleconference only and will not be physically open to the public. Commissioners and staff will teleconference into the meeting by audio and or video. The meeting will be conducted via Zoom webinar. Cindy, do you have any more for us?
No, no, Chair Pont.
Thank you. And no further ado, Marika, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll call this meeting to order. Cindy, will you take the roll, please?
Chair Pont,
Here.
Vice Chair Hill,
Here.
Commissioner Anderson,
Here.
Segura,
Here.
Rothschild.
Here.
Okay. That leads us to public forum. This is an opportunity for the public to address the commission on items of interest of the public that are not listed on the agenda. Because of the restrictions imposed by the Brown Act, the commission may not engage in discussion or take action on matters not described in the agenda. Please observe the time limit of 4 minutes. Cindy, do we have any members of the public that wish to speak at this point?
There are no hands raised.
You're on mute, Cindy, please.
There are no raised hands.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Thank you. That takes us to item 4, consent items. Members of the commission or the public may ask that any items be considered individually for purposes of considering alternative action, for extended discussion, or for public comment. Unless that is done, one motion may be used to adopt all recommended actions. We have the minutes of 7:20 and 8:17 on the consent agenda tonight. Is there any member of the commission that wishes to pull this item for additional consideration? Seeing none. Madam Clerk, is there anybody online that seems to have an interest in pulling this item?
There are no raised hands.
All right. Then a motion is in order if someone cares to make one on the.
I move that we approve the minutes as written for the 7:20 and the 8:17 sessions.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll
Thank
second.
you. Thank you. Cindy, will you take the count for us, please?
Vice Chair Hill,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Rothschild,
Yes.
Segura,
I can approve the minutes for August, but I was gone on July 20th. So I don't know how we handle that. Can I abstain for the July 20th?
You can, but it's not necessary.
Okay. Well, I approve. Yes, for me.
Chair Pond.
Yes. All right, that takes us to item 5, public hearings. We have one public hearing tonight, item 5.1. A request for adoption of a resolution approving a demolition permit and design review in order to demolish an existing single-family residence to accommodate the construction of a new single-family home on the property located at 1420/1428 Allen Avenue in the medium density residential zoning district. I will,
Excuse me, Chair
open
Pond.
public hearing. Yeah.
I believe Commissioner Anderson is raising her hand.
Yes, Commissioner Anderson.
I need to recuse myself. My husband's business partner is a tenant on this property that will be affected by the outcome of this decision.
Okay, thank you. You beat me to the punch because the next question was, has there been any ex parte communications or does anyone have to recuse themselves? Seeing no other hands go up. All right. Staff report, please. Aaron, is this your item?
It is. Thank you, Chair Pont. I am going to attempt to share my screen. Okay. So the existing approximately 11,886 square foot parcel is currently developed with 2 residential units, one toward the front of the property and one toward the rear of the property. The single-story 2-bed, 2-bath front unit at 1428 Allen is approximately 1,210 square feet with an attached 265 square foot 1-car garage. The single-story 2-bed, 1-bath rear unit at 1420 Allen is approximately 728 square feet with an approximately 187 square foot detached carport. The front unit was remodeled in 2012 and received a St. Helena Beautification Foundation Award in 2014. Each of the existing homes are approximately 17 to 17.5 feet in height. The applicant is seeking demolition permit and design review approval to demolish the smaller of the 2 homes toward the back of the property in order to construct a new 2,732 square foot 2-story single-family residence with a 400 square foot attached 2-car garage and 387 square foot porch. The proposed residence would have 1 bedroom and 1.5 baths and would be connected to the existing front unit by a shared wall, which is here. The front unit's garage and laundry areas consisting of approximately 265 square feet would be incorporated into the new home. It should be noted that the laundry portion of the existing front home is located 4 feet 10 inches from the side yard property line, which meets code for an ADU, which is 4 feet minimum. However, it is considered non-conforming for a primary dwelling. As no new square footage is being added within the non-conforming area, staff believes that the non-conformance is permitted to remain. Additionally, the common wall shared by the connected homes will result in a loss of approximately 15 square feet from the front home, resulting in a new living area of approximately 1,195 square feet, as shown on the plans before you. The proposed new home would be finished with a variety of contemporary materials, including vertical wood siding and a standing seam metal roof. The height of the proposed home at its highest point would be 25 feet at its highest point, which would be approximately 8 feet taller than what exists now. On the screen are elevations of the new proposed residence. We'll go back to the site plan. The front unit would become an ADU upon completion of the new larger home toward the rear of the property. The proposed conversion of the front home to an ADU is permitted as a matter of state law and St. Helena Municipal Code section 17.116.030 and is not subject to design review this evening. The project meets all development standards as required by section 17.44.060 of the St. Helena Municipal Code, including lot coverage, setbacks, floor area, and height. As I just noted, a portion of the front home that is set back 4 feet 10 inches from the side yard property line would be incorporated into the new rear home. As I mentioned, staff believe this is an existing nonconformity and is permitted to remain as long as the degree of nonconformity is not increased. That said, the code isn't clear whether an existing nonconformity can be transferred to a new structure and remodeled. While it is clear that under the state ADU law, that if the area in question, again, the yellow portion on the plans before you is part of an ADU, it may remain where it is and would be conforming. But the state ADU law does not apply to the area in question if it is not part of the ADU. As proposed, the area in question would not be part of an ADU. It would be part of the new main house, which is subject to all the city's normal non-ADU requirements, restrictions, and standards. The commission must decide whether to treat the area in question as a standalone structure that is subject to the non-conforming use provisions governing a remodel or reconstruction of a non-conforming structure, or as part of the building to which it is currently attached, the existing house which will be converted to the ADU. It is either viewed as subject to non-conforming use structure and allowed to be attached to the new rear home and its existing nonconformity, or you can view it as attached to the existing house, therefore not able to be attached to the new home without creating a nonconformity. Staff has received a few letters from neighbors expressing concerns about potential privacy impacts, specifically related to the second-story windows. These letters were attached to the staff report. However, there's nothing in the code that prohibits second-story windows. With that, staff is making a recommendation that the Planning Commission determine the project is exempt from the requirements of CEQA pursuant to section 15.301, 15.303, and accept the required findings and approve a resolution granting demolition permit and design review approval for the proposed demolition and new construction on the property located at 1420/1428 Allen. And I don't know if that recommendation showed up. Share screen, sorry. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. We do have the city attorney in attendance this evening in case there are any technical or legal questions that arise. And the applicant is here as well, should you have any questions for him. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Aaron. Does any of the member of the commission have questions for staff at this point? I don't see any hands. I have a couple. To your knowledge, Aaron, has this up before, or is this novel, where we're essentially moving a non-conformance from one building to another?
I didn't catch all that. You were breaking up a little bit, but I think what you asked is if this is something common or something unusual, and I'd say it's fairly unique. I don't think I've seen anything quite like it.
Okay.
If I might.
These two
If I
buildings.
might make
Yes. Sid.
If you might try turning off your video and just staying on audio, that might help your bandwidth.
Well, let's see. Make everybody feel better too. Any better?
You're clear.
Okay. Um, hmm. These two buildings, once they're constructed, are independent buildings as far as our code is concerned. In other words, you can get a demolition permit on one and not on the other. You can get a reconstruction permit on one and not the other. So they're independent buildings as far as our code is concerned.
I think that would be fair to say.
Okay. Okay. So this is an unusual situation, and they are independent buildings. My last question of staff at this point has to do with when and how is the ADU designated? Is it done by the owner? Is it done by staff? Is it automatic? Is there an application? Let me tell you why I'm asking. Because once we approve this, assuming we approve it, the applicant will have permission to build a second building on the lot, right? Destroy one and build another. That would seem to me to be something that would require a conditional use permit if one of the buildings was not labeled an ADU. So I just want to be assured that it's automatic, it's fast, it's immediate, it's before the occupancy permit, that this is actually labeled, one of the buildings actually labeled as an ADU. Otherwise, we will have permitted something that's not allowed under our code.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure there's 100% clear answer to that, but my initial thought is that it would be during the building process when they're getting building permits to modify the structure. One's going to be treated as an ADU and one's going to be treated as a primary dwelling.
So the designation is done by staff on submittal of a building permit request?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, even going through this discretionary process, while the ADU is outside of your purview, the state law, you know, permits conversion of that structure to an ADU. So by definition, I think going through this process, it de facto becomes the ADU, but that would be reinforced at the building permit process. And I think Todd can probably chime in.
Chair and commissioners.
There we go. Todd.
Hi, great question. The applicant designates one of the units as an ADU by submitting an application. There is no, that's when the identity of one of the units as an ADU is established. We process it as an ADU from that point on. When there's a certificate of occupancy, it's for the ADU. When there's a building permit issued, it's for the ADU. But it all begins with the application. If they don't apply for it as an ADU, we don't treat it like an ADU.
So it's automatic on submission for a building permit or for the demolition?
Whatever the appropriate application is, Chair. Yeah, if they're applying for an ADU that only requires a building permit, they would come in and seek a building permit for an ADU. If it does not qualify for what we tend to call a building permit only ADU, but then they would need to apply for all the approvals that are necessary, a building permit. And Aaron, remind me, what do we have in St. Helena? Do we call it an ADU permit?
Use permit.
There we go. So they'd have to ask for both.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't any possibility of us approving something that in the future would not be legal. If the applicant was the one that had to proceed to call it an ADU. That you've assured me it's automatic, it's staff driven on submission of the building permit request. Okay, we're cool. I'm done. This is a time at which the applicant can speak to the commission. Sir, do you wish to address us?
George, we can't hear you. I don't know if your microphone is turned down too low, or maybe you need to get closer. You're not muted.
You are now.
You are muted
He
now.
just muted himself.
Can you override that, Cindy?
I'm trying. I'm asking him to unmute himself.
Unmute.
There he goes. Ah, you just muted yourself again. Okay, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. There you go. You're good.
I'm okay now.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Other than answering specific questions, I can only address some of the discussion that I heard before. This is
George, you're going to have to speak much louder. I think we're all having trouble hearing you.
the ADU law provides for attached and detached ADU. And each one of those classifications have different square footage. This is an attached ADU. And it is being permitted or asked to be permitted as an ADU. It has its own kitchen. That's the whole point of it being an ADU. As far as that little appendix, which is now a laundry and will become a powder room, when the permit was issued in 2012 for the remodel of the front unit, that area was part of a garage. So the city of San Helena permitted the change of the use from a garage to a laundry. So even though it is a non-conforming part of the structure. So I think under that same logic, I don't see really a problem. The structure is there. All we do is change it from a laundry. The plumbing is there to a powder room. There's nothing else I want to say. The reason, the question about ADU or no ADU, the reason we are doing this project is we live up on top of Diamond Mountain Road. It's 3.5 miles up from the highway, a very winding road. It's even worse now after the fires, and 5 years old. So it's becoming will becoming more and more difficult to negotiate that road. The idea is to live in the new unit and either have somebody else living there as a rental, or if we need to down the road, have somebody there who can help us negotiate our older age. So this is the idea behind.
I think I'd like to jump in here and remind everyone listening that the commission has no power and no say over the ADU. Stay strictly ministerial. We are only commenting on aspects of the structure that are to be transferred to the structure next door, adjoining. We will not be voting on the ADU. We will not be considering the ADU. We will not be discussing the ADU. I just don't want to get any hot water here from the city attorney by trying to talk about ADUs when we have absolutely no ability or power to do so. With that, does anyone have any questions for the applicant? I don't see any hands.
Not for the applicant, but if we're not assessing whether it's a non-conforming structure or an ADU, can you narrow the issue a little and tell us what we're assessing?
Well, we have a couple of items on board. A, whether or not we think it's exempt from CEQA.
Mhm.
B, the demolition permit for the second unit back there, 1428.
Okay.
That's at question. C, design review for the new building. All right. And also the question that Aaron brought up about the non-conformity, which is novel. We've had non-conforming structures before, but it's basically been the same building that has been non-conforming. This is something novel in that it essentially transformity from what is now a perfectly conforming building, because you have to remember the ADU will be conforming,
Mhm.
to a second building that is now going to be non-conforming. So it's essentially moving the non-conformance from A to B, if you will. And that's the remaining novel question on this application.
And so if we move the structure to be non-conforming, what results?
Can we talk about this under discussion? I mean, it's probably not appropriate for members of the commission to trade discussion back and forth at this particular point. If
Okay.
you have a question of the applicant or of staff or of council, that's entirely appropriate right now.
Okay.
Does anyone have a question for applicant, staff, or council? Seeing none, that brings us down to public testimony for and potentially against the project. Cindy, is there anyone who wishes to speak?
There are no hands raised. Oh, there is a hand raised.
Excuse
Just
me,
one moment.
excuse me, Chair Pont, can you officially open the public
Yes.
hearing, please?
I already did, right off the top. Following our process,
Okay,
I
just
opened the public hearing right off the top.
Leslie, are we
Are
ready
there
for
any-
public comment?
We don't have
I have
anybody at
the
all.
public
huh?
that would like, we have one person that would like to address the commission. Leslie, I'm going to allow you to talk. You can
Okay.
unmute yourself.
Thank you. Welcome.
Leslie,
Can you hear
you
us?
can unmute yourself.
I can hear you now.
Okay. Hi, this is Leslie and Grant Ellis. We are the neighbors at 1440 Allen Avenue, just north of the property. I think that you saw in the packet that we have included, we're not opposed to George demolishing this back house, but we are opposed to the privacy issues that are occurring, especially with the window in the upstairs portion on the north side of the building. Unfortunately, George put the window right in the middle of our existing window that looks right into our living space. And I don't know about you guys, but we feel that we do have an obligation to keep our privacy within our home and in our property. This second story also imposes on our backyard privacy as well. But we're not so concerned with that as much as we are with the interior space of our home. We're not opposed to putting windows on that side, but if you could just move it a little bit so it's not directly centered into looking into our private space. George and Grant and I, my husband, who's sitting here with me, got together to see if there were some resolutions. And George suggested one-way mirrored windows, which we both found out do not work at night, so it's not really an option. Our windows open inward on our home, and that is, they're like a vent window, so it's not easy to put like a curtain or anything up there. Also, we use it as ventilation for our great room. Secondly, there's a tree, existing tree right now that would be a barrier, but George is going to take that tree down. And he said that the city's not allowing any new plants to be planted right now for landscaping purposes. And thirdly, he said he could change the pitch of the roof and actually remove the window. And I believe the pitch of the roof was a 4-inch change. And he said that he had talked to Aaron, but Aaron wasn't taking any changes in planning. But we feel like right now is the time to make these changes. As you're aware, when you build something, it lasts forever. And these are just drawings. And now is the time to discuss this. And we don't want to be neighbors that are combative, but we stand to lose not only privacy in our backyard, but privacy within our home. And we recognize that we're in a neighborhood. We have windows that face both sides of us, but as neighbors, nobody's windows line right up with each other. And the other thing is that second story window, it's in his master bedroom, and he can stand there and look right down on us. It's 8 feet higher than the window that's currently in our home, which is 18 to 24 feet high. So if you're standing 8 feet above somebody and looking down, and I think you can look at the picture that we included, my husband got up on a shed and held his hand up as high as he could, and that's the best angle we could get. It's actually a little bit higher than that. So he'd actually have a better view into our home than what we could say. So we're asking the commission to please help us resolve that issue. We're not opposed to windows per se, but we are opposed to windows that look right into our home. So, and we're also asking George, the other option is he wanted to put a deed restriction on us. If we agreed to a deed restriction, he would remove the window. And I don't feel that there's a need for that. And so we're coming to the commission and the staff to see if we can resolve this, because I think we don't want to really set a precedent of building 2-story windows in the back of people's lots that take away all the privacy. And there are many neighbors losing their privacy because of this build. And we have no other choice than to come to the commission and ask you to help us resolve this concern so that we can get on board with George's idea. We are not opposed to him building something back there, and even a 2-story or a 1-story with very high ceilings, so that we're not losing our privacy. So hoping that you guys can take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, Cindy, is there anyone else who cares to speak?
There are no other hands raised.
All right. Then I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission right now for discussion. We have several items to consider, including this discussion about the window. I'm presuming that's the 1 second-story window on the north side. Does anyone care to start? I don't see anybody.
I guess I have a
Yes,
question
Sarah.
for Mr. Lishman. Are there any legal basis for us to not approve as per Leslie's requests?
That's, well, under our code, if you're going to deny the project for design, you have to go to whether or not our required findings for design were considered or not. And the only reason to reject a design is based on a finding by the commission that they did not consider one or all of the items under our findings. Not due, not complete, not carry forward, but consider, which is kind of an odd word. Am I correct on that, Aaron, Todd?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you,
That
Chair.
would be the only reason to turn this project down because of design. However, we also have the non-conformance issue to consider, no pun intended, as well. Which is a whole different kettle of fish, because I believe that that comes down to code interpretation. And that's what the commission is for, is to interpret parts of the code. At least one of the things they're for, to interpret parts of the code that don't appear to be clear. And the staff said this part of the code is not necessarily clear for this kind of swap from one building to another. What else? Anyone else? Yes, Dan, please.
I guess I would try to break this down into the different pieces. I'd start with the nonconformity issue as its own piece, and I think my read on this, the entirety of the building that's staying right now. Right now, it's considered, it is a non-conforming, entirely non-conforming building, non-conforming but legal building. Once the piece 2 is in effect, all but that yellow, what's highlighted in yellow portion, becomes conforming because it's an ADU and its rules change. The way I look at it, and I think that was probably early on a challenging or piece that needed to be figured out, but I sort of look at that, if I can just refer to it as the little yellow block, as the sort of this knuckle that is essentially staying the same in its non-conformity. It's becoming, right now it's a piece of the main building of the primary residence, and that's essentially what it remains once the second piece is built. And the first, what is now the primary building or primary residence, which is currently an entirely non-conforming but legal building, is becoming 80–90% of it is conforming. The other piece of it that's marked in yellow is remaining as a legal but non-conforming piece. So that's how I interpret that piece. As to privacy concerns, I think it's really important that the city applies code evenly to everyone. I think there is no provision in code for privacy. Your right to a view, your right to privacy is within your control up until your property line. So long as what happens on the other side of the property line, your neighbor, is within code, even if it challenges your existing sense of privacy or expectation or view, or has no provision in code. And the other piece that I think is important for the city to point out is there's no provision in code for story poles. There are jurisdictions that do that. And there are methods that you could introduce that into our code. But the procedure for that would be that it would have to come from the makers of code, who essentially are our city council, not us. And so, while I can empathize that the situation is changing, I think it's important that the legal sort of onus and understanding is made very clear that privacy, there are things you can mitigate within your purview. And I think it's one thing for neighbors to, in a cooperative way, point out to each other what aspects matter to them and negotiate that on their own should they be willing to do that. But I think it's also very important that occurs in a cooperative and not kind of coercive sense. And I think it's inappropriate for us as a commission to take a side on that. I don't think we can give more weight to one versus the other. I think that's a negotiation that either happens, and I think if it's going to happen appropriately, it needs to happen really early on and well ahead of a planning commission kind of operation or situation. So I'm not willing to jump in and take a side on that. I don't think it's appropriate. I think if the way I look at it, if in my view, the non-conforming situation is maybe a bit complicated, but convincing to me. The rest of it, I think, is within code bounds, and so I would support the project.
Any other commissioners have any comments? Okay, well,
I tend to agree with Dan. I tend to agree with Dan that it isn't necessarily under our purview to settle neighbor disputes, but I do think looking at the code, we would have a hook to, at the very least, discuss whether that window and the privacy issue that flows from it is appropriate under the design criteria, because it talks about relationship of the design to the site, and I feel like that window isn't necessarily needed in that exact spot. So I do think there is a hook for us to be able to discuss it if we want.
We can certainly discuss it, and you're more than invited to do so. So what's your opinion on the window?
It's compelling to me that it is very invasive to the neighbor's property. I agree. I think that if we set a precedent where we are getting involved in these kind of disputes in every design review, it's going to be a problem. But that picture is it's an invasive spot to put a window.
Can I just ask you to define site in that piece of code? Its relation to its site.
Here's a piece that calls for that.
Marika, you're muted. I don't know if you knew that.
It just says relationship of design to the site. It's 17.164.030 is the code section.
Right. I understand that reference, but
yeah.
The way I take that is relation to its site.
Its own site, yeah.
I think You know, I think it's I think it's actually kind of a slippery slope where we allow one property to sort of prove that it can encumber its neighbor. You know, and I think perhaps in a code revision that that piece of code should specifically say its site.
Yeah.
But that's
No, I mean, I think
that's the way I would read that.
I think they're all a bit vague, though. I mean, if you look at section 5, whether the design promotes harmonious transition in scale and character in areas between different designated land uses. I mean, that I guess is more, I mean, it's clear that it's to its own land uses, but you could make the argument that it's to neighboring land uses. I just, all of these are very vague to me, so I think you can read into it to the extent you want.
And thus our problem, because they
Right.
are kind of. And the kicker here is 17.1.164.040C. Only the proponent's failure to take reasonable account of the items discussed in 17.164.010 through 164.030 shall justify the commission's approval of a proposal solely on basis of design. So that makes it difficult. You would have to sort of say, well, he didn't take into reasonable account. If I can jump in here, I can't say that he hasn't. Because if you look at the distributions on windows on both sides of that building there, you notice that there aren't a lot of buildings, a lot of windows on the south elevation. And on the north elevation, we're talking about count them, one window. So it'd be difficult for me to say he hasn't taken it into consideration. I would certainly hope. Go ahead, Marika.
Didn't the neighbors say that they discussed about putting the window in a different place?
They did say they had talked about that. I don't know if they came to any resolution that both parties found acceptable. Let me do something a little funky here. I'm going to reopen the public hearing. And both the applicant and the earlier speaker, if she's still available, what kind of solution they came to, if any. So if I could ask the applicant.
Leslie has got her hand raised.
She does. Good. Let me start with the applicant first, if you will, Cindy.
Okay.
Yeah, you had a discussion with your neighbors. Was there any solution on that one north side second story window that seems to be the subject of debate?
First of all, the purpose of that window. If you notice, the east elevation has windows that have a 48-inch sill height, and that is not that does not qualify as a fire escape. So the purpose of that window on the side is a fire escape window. In order to lower the sill of the east elevation, we'd have to lower the roof, and the pitch of the roof is already very low, and it would impact the entire design.
So it's there to meet. So it's there to meet emergency access codes.
That's what it is.
Okay.
That's why it's there. I really don't need it for any other reason.
Okay.
Also to consider the eye level height of that second story window is at 17 feet. And the living room of the neighbors is a 1 story, it's down below. So it's a pretty steep angle from that roof down. I mean, from that level down. Like I said, in order to have the rest of the windows of that bedroom and the other windows, the bathroom that's next to it, we'd have to lower the whole roof. When we lower the whole roof, we get into a more extensive roof. And the living room of our structure is a cathedral ceiling, and it is already very low. So we would have to completely redesign the back portion, the one-story portion of the building. Now, in terms of privacy, if you consider that we have another property on Crinella Drive, and 2 years ago, we planted 24-inch box oleanders. The other day, we trimmed them down 2 years later from 17 feet down to 15 feet. They grow pretty fast and they use almost no water. Once they get going, they don't need any water. That would give the neighbor, if they planted them, they need about 5 or 6 of them. In 3 years, they'd have their whole living room shielded. And that is nothing compared to what we would have to do to eliminate that window. So if you apply a certain degree of fairness and proportionality, I think it would be unfair to disallow that window. Having said that, I'm still open to slightly redesigning the roof lines in the back. And we'd have to discuss costs for the redesign with the neighbor. But I'm open to that. I tried to do that before the meeting, but for several weeks now, because I visited there, but I had no response.
So if I can paraphrase what you're saying, you're still interested in working with the neighbors to come up with a mutually agreeable solution, which may include screening, which may include some elements of redesign on your building. Did anybody talk about obscure glass, for example, in that window?
That's another, we talked about that. We talked about reflective glass, but I checked into it and I sent an email to the neighbor. Reflective glass doesn't work because it only reflects when the light outside is stronger than the light inside. So it will not work for them at night.
Yeah, it's a half mirror, but I'm talking about pebbled glass or
Really
something like that.
Yeah, but that would not really work for them because, like I said, you need stronger light outside than inside to get the reflection.
Not for pebbled glass, something that ruins the smooth refractive index of the panes that are in there. But I'm getting into design. I see Todd getting a little nervous about that, which is true. Our code calls for not getting into design. But it seems to me there are solutions that are available that A, wouldn't require you to move or remove the window. B, does not worry that much about reflectivity because it's not dependent on reflectivity to work. So with that, and I would hope that the neighbors would come up with a solution. I don't know if I want to, or even if it's possible at this point to say that you didn't consider the problems. Does Leslie still wish to speak, Cindy?
Also,
Her hand is still raised.
Please, could you have her talk?
yeah,
Leslie, you can unmute yourself.
may I respond?
Hi, this is Grant Ellis. Can you hear me? I'm here with
Yes.
Leslie. So George, you would like to respond? Should I wait for George to do that or should I speak now?
possibility of the two triangles that are framing their cathedral ceiling to have opaque glass. That would leave this a big window wall that they have there. So one could use frosted glass on the top portion to leave that would give them the privacy. But planting 5 or 6 oleanders up there, I think is nothing compared to what we would have to do. Now, like I said before, I'm willing to work with them, but I would not appreciate the planning commission to take sides on this, and especially considering the proportionality of the remedies.
Please, the opponent, could you speak now?
Yeah, excuse
The
me.
public hearing is still open.
So not opponents, if I can just be clear, it's quite neighborly. George and I have been speaking, and if I can just, I didn't mean to bring this up. This is my personal thing, but the reason George and I and Leslie had some discussion a little more than a month ago, and we were in the middle of that discussion, and he, we talked about a few different solutions. It seemed like moving the window or omitting the window or changing it somehow was the best solution. It would create some added expense and work for George, but he was kindly and willing to do that. He asked for in exchange for that, have a deed restriction, a mutual deed restriction on both of our properties that would not allow either one of us to put second-story windows facing each other's property, which we feel like that's not necessary. I don't want to restrict what somebody builds next door. I just feel like it's this one particular window in this one particular location, and I don't think it's necessary to have a deed restriction on either property is what I'm trying to say. Just an acknowledgement that when something is built, this window doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists on a site, on a house, with neighbors in a city. It exists. The site is not just this location, but how it relates to everything around it. And so, for us, it's a big impact on our privacy. There's other impacts on our privacy, but really, we don't want to. I'm not trying to restrict what happens next door. We just want to address this one window. And George, I want to apologize for not getting back to you, but I've had an exceptionally difficult month. I have terminal cancer, and I have been put on hospice shortly after we began to speak about the window. So at this point, the window is not so important for me. I'm not going to be here in a short period of time if the doctors are correct. And I'm not trying to play the cancer card for any kind of sympathy, but just to say that I didn't mean to neglect you or to neglect that conversation. Leslie and I have had a lot going on in that time. Her father has also passed away. We just have a lot on our plate. So I apologize. I don't mean to have ignored you. This privacy, it's a thing. Leslie's going to be left here in the house on her own, and she's got this amazing view right down into the house that I think you can see from that photo. When we saw that, getting up there on the shed, it was shocking to see. I didn't even realize. I imagined at nighttime there would be a loss of privacy, but it's just amazing to see how much it is. And we're open to all different solutions. The plants, there's an existing tree that does obscure the view, but George said he was going to cut it down as part of the build, and that because of the water restrictions that he was not allowed to plant anything there. That seems kind of crazy. If that's the city rule, I don't know, that we can't plant a tree. But then in terms of planting oleanders, he said 17 feet high, that doesn't get to the center of that big window on our house. It's still too low. We really need something that's closer to about 23 feet high and evergreen. And we've talked to some landscape architects, because we realize that's, we're going to do what we can to mitigate it. I think that frosted or pebbled glass, if George was willing to do that, would be great. That would be satisfactory. And it's not a redesign of all the other windows, because I do realize it's the egress window that we're talking about in the bedroom. On the east side, there's several windows across the east side of the plan. There is one window on the far right-hand side that the sill could be lowered without changing the roof line. However, that's not a great design resolution, I don't think. And I think George agrees that you'd have one window lower than the rest on one wall, that's not ideal, but possible. Lowering the other windows along that back side, all of them, lowering the pitch of the roof, that would be acceptable to us. We'd be very happy with that. I mean, when George we invited him to come over, and we stood in the great room and we talked about it, and he said just what he said here on the discussion, that this window is not necessary. He wouldn't pick this window, but he needs an egress window, and he was willing to not have that, the window there. So any of those solutions could work for us, and we want to have a good neighborly relation, and whether I'm hoping the commission can help us out here, but I'm also, my preferred way would be to work it out with George. I knew the meeting was today. I mustered what I could, and I sent him an email and asked if he heard back from Aaron about the new design. With the window changed, he said the last email I got before was that he was gonna reach out to Aaron and ask about what does he have to do to change the one window. And so he got back to me and he said that he couldn't change the design, at that point about a month or 3 weeks ago, that it was submitted and it had to be submitted as it was. And so now the only place of discussion was here. So that's why I came tonight, to Leslie, we came to discuss that. And I'm hoping that we can work something out, and that's agreeable to everyone. So thank you for your time. I know I'm kind of long-winded there. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Well, I'm certainly hoping that the neighbors come up with something they can agree upon. But for right now, let me close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission.
Excuse me, Chair Pond, our city attorney would like to speak.
Oh, Todd, you got your hand up. Sorry.
I do. After a fashion, I guess this is how we do it on Zoom. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, first of all, thank you for acknowledging the provision in 17-164-040A that says that the commission shall not design or assist in the design the project. That's a little tough, of course, because the proponent is supposed to take reasonable account of these items. So you can sort of hold the applicant accountable for addressing the many criteria that are in 17-164-030. And there are ample bases, I think, here for the commission to concern itself. I don't know if these have been mentioned yet, but 030A1, or I'm sorry, A2, requires the commission to consider the compatibility of the design with the immediate environment of the site. That's not the site itself, it's the stuff around the site. Also down in 6, compatibility with, albeit future construction, both on and off the site. And then in, sorry, my eyes are a little fuzzy. In 8, whether the planning and the siting and the various features create, among other things, a sense of order or provide a desirable environment for the general community. I'm skipping some there, obviously. But I guess my point is that the commission does have the ability to look at window placement and the effect on the adjacent properties, the quality of life, etc. You shouldn't get into prescribing specific solutions. I'm very comfortable with the direction that the commission is taking of encouraging the parties to work it out. Cities very often do address these exact kinds of privacy concerns by simply requiring frosted glass. It doesn't add a lot to the project. It's a nominal difference in price, if any, and it tends to be a complete solution. If you'd like to leave the parties to work that out, you can. It probably lies within your purview to require that as a condition to ensure that the proponent has reasonably addressed the concerns above. It's up to you.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I certainly agree that there needs to be a solution to this item. I don't think story poles would help. Clearly, and they know what the view is like. That would not be helpful at all. I've also got an item on the non-conformance that, frankly, I look at it differently. I'm looking at our code, and it calls for the gradual elimination and or compliance with the policies of the general plan and zoning ordinance. That's right off the bat. That's the purpose of the non-conformance section. The two non-conformance subsections that staff is suggesting would apply, 17.140.030 or C, I don't think they apply directly. The way they're written is one thing, they're written in the singular. This is a plural action. We're actually taking a non-conformance from one building and trading it to the next building. And that's where we have to decide whether or not that's allowed under our code or not. And I would think not, for two reasons. One, like I said, the code doesn't seem to recognize, it doesn't recognize the swap. And two, it calls for elimination of non-conformance. This doesn't eliminate a non-conformance. It makes sure it continues for the next lifespan of the building, another 50 years. And unfortunately, to my experience, every non-conformance situation we've dealt with, where it's the building that is non-conforming, it has been the building that's been rebuilt. Not you trade the non-conformance to the building next door, that, as staff is willing to say, is an independent structure, can be treated independently. I have trouble with moving a non-conformance from one building to the next and saying, voila, we're fine. I don't think our code calls for that. I don't think our code countenances that. I don't think our code allows that. So regardless of the window, the plural, and I think the frosted glass is a wonderful idea. I'm not emphasizing a design point here. I'm just saying I think it's a great idea. I would say we need to turn this one down on the non-conformance. We're moving a non-conformance from one building to the other. The code doesn't call for that. The code doesn't even contemplate that. And I think it's in our power to interpret it as saying, well, it's not in the code. It's not contemplated in the code. The code calls for making non-conformance eventually, extending this non-conformance to a new building. that will be there for the next half century, I don't think our code calls for. So I would suggest we turn it down because of that item and that item alone.
May I speak to that?
No, sir, this is
Okay.
our discussion only at this point. Thank you.
Hey, can I chime
Sure,
in
Dan.
just on, can you address specifically my interpretation that let's talk about that yellow portion.
Yes.
And do you agree that the existing main residence, which is going to become the ADU, is entirely non-conforming as it stands right now, legal, but non-conforming?
That's correct.
Right.
But according to staff, the second they turn in their building request, it becomes the ADU and this becomes conforming.
Right, but nothing physically changes on that yellow portion. No envelope changes, no actually use changes on that portion. That portion remains part of a primary residence.
No. It's moving.
It's not
It's
moving.
moving. It's moving from one building to the next.
It is not moving, John. It is if in fact the same piece of real estate, the same space, and its use is actually remaining the same. And as non-conforming.
I understand where you're coming from.
Part of primary residence.
I
Which is
understand
what it is, which is what it is now. The rest of that building is becoming more conforming, which speaks to some of the code that you were talking about. That the goal is to make things more conforming, but we all know that that's not always possible.
I will say this. I don't think conforming and non-conforming is a matter of inches. It either is or it isn't. This is
I totally agree with you. But
a non-conforming building. It falls under the non-conformance. It is non-conforming. The non-conformity hasn't taken away.
and it hasn't changed. It
It's a
will not have changed. There's no movement. There's no movement within that yellow space.
It's now part of a completely independent other building. Part of the building that was non-conforming, that will become conforming immediately on submission of the building request. It is moving buildings. And we've never, ever, ever had a non-conformance move from the next. I see Todd has the yellow hand of I want to speak up again. So let's hear from staff, from city attorney on this one.
All right, thank you, Chair. Commissioners, I just wanted to chime in from the legal side because we did kick this question around quite a lot before staff decided to put the question to the commission, precisely because it's not clear from the code. Hence the difficulty of the current conversation. But I do want to encourage you to sort of think about this as if the existing house to which the yellow portion is currently attached, that portion that will become an ADU, forget about that if you can. Pretend that it burned down. And the only thing remaining is the yellow, because legally, that's sort of how we need to look at it. That
Yellow piece outstanding.
Yeah, imagine that the yellow portion is the only thing left standing from this currently non-conforming structure, because the rest of that building will essentially go away in terms of being treated under the code. By being converted to an ADU, it sort of leaves the general zoning code and has a second life under the ADU statute and ordinance. And nothing about that ADU affects what happens to the yellow if the yellow is not part of the ADU. So let's just pretend for a few minutes here that the yellow is the only thing standing from that existing house. And maybe that helps you to approach this question of, do you treat that yellow remnant as a non-conforming, oh, I don't remember what it's called. The code is broader than just building. I think it's building, structure.
Structure or other physical feature.
That's right. So just treat it like that yellow is the only thing standing, and it's a physical structure, whatever it is. And then the new house comes to it. And are you okay with the yellow being part of the new house? And it's treated under the non-conforming structure part of the code? Or do you think that it doesn't qualify under the non-conforming part of the code and therefore can only be treated as part of the new house? That's how I would try to frame the question to tee up the legal issue.
I understand your reluctance to deal with the ADU at all, just because of how state law treats them. However, I think the point is here, you have a piece moving from one building to the next. I don't think our code allows for that. Period.
If I can just reiterate or explain my read on what the city attorney has just said, is that the yellow portion has standing, has legal standing as an existing entity. Its legal standing is, if you, and we don't have a right to do anything but consider whatever piece that is becoming the ADU essentially evaporates from our purview because it's sort of automatically becomes legal.
Yes.
But the yellow piece remains and is, is entitled to its standing, its current legal standing as a non-conforming structure. And I don't, there is no movement there. The yellow piece remains. I think the way Todd put it, that the other piece is coming to it, I think is appropriate way to look at it. And I think it's pretty critical that we stand up for the legal standing of that yellow piece. Just from a legal point of view, I think that's pretty solid to me.
Point of view, the city attorney has said it's our decision to make. The city attorney hasn't said, nope, you absolutely have to think about it this way, and that's the only way you can think about it. Ergo, I hate to discount your argument that we have to consider it. We do not have to consider it in that fashion.
Chair, if I may, again, I apologize. I feel like I feel some responsibility to put the finest point on the legal question that's being put in front of you as possible. I'm looking at the code right now. Really, what staff needs from this body tonight is an interpretation of 17140030. Specifically, is that yellow portion, when you ignore the rest of the building that will become the ADU, if it's the only thing left standing, does this body consider that to be, that remnant, that yellow remnant, does it consider that remnant to be a legal non-conforming building? A non-conforming building, this is under A, a non-conforming structure, or a non-conforming other physical feature? Because if the answer to any of those questions is yes, then you proceed under 140030. However, if this body looks at that yellow remnant and says, it's not a non-conforming building, structure, or physical feature, so we're going to treat it like it's part of the new building, period. I think that option is open to you to consider, but you get to make up your own mind, and this body needs to make a decision on that question tonight.
Well, it's clearly not a non-conforming building, because a building under our code is something that is or is intended to be, I believe it's habitable, but I don't know if they use that word exactly. Structure intended for any use or occupancy with substantial walls and roof. No. Our code doesn't define other physical feature. Once again, that's up to us. So that leaves us with structure, right?
Are you asking for an answer, John, or?
I'm looking up structure now, trying to, in our code.
Could we get Marika and Rosara to weigh in on that piece of it, please?
Yeah, I'm torn because I think I do see the point that that is not being torn down. So keeping it as an existing non-conforming structure seems consistent with its use now. But if everything else is demolished, that section is no longer part of the site that was deemed it non-conforming. So it seems like it would then become a new structure in my mind. Is that how you're understanding it, John?
That's part of it.
Okay.
The other part of it is that it is literally being moved from one building to another. We have a special case here. I recognize it's a special case, and it's a small item on a special case. But
I
that
don't
would
see that
mean
it's being moved. How can you?
We can have this here. Oh, it's moving from one building to another, one independent building to another. The new building, the added house, is completely independent of the ADU, and the ADU is completely independent of the other building. So we're essentially borrowing non-conformance from one building and moving it to a second building. I see nothing in there that allows for that. And the only reason it's moving is the owner wants it to. Not a good enough reason when we're supposed to eliminate non-conformities, not continue them for the next half century.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I do see Dan's point that it's not, we're not changing that yellow portion.
I also see Dan's point and recognize this is a narrow decision, one way or the other. But I also believe that if this goes forward as designed, it opens us for all kinds of shenanigans all over town.
Can you give an example of like a hypothetical that would result from approving this? Like maybe in a
like a hypothetical. If this is a structure, then every doghouse, water house, and outhouse in town is a structure. Maybe not permitted, but definitely a structure, definitely non-conforming. So all of a sudden you could have houses built or extended to right on the edge of the property line, and we would have no word to say about it.
Can I bring it back to language that calling, a doghouse and I think is inappropriate in this. I think it belittles the actual what's happening here, and what happens in a case like this. And I could speak to ways that I've approached this as somebody who's built and considered properties that have non-conforming structures on them. They become essentially pieces that you have to weigh and decide, okay, do I fit into that non-conformance? Is there some advantage to doing that or not? And if you decide that there is, you legally, by having purchased that non-conformity, are entitled to that. It's not for us to remove that, sort of the rights that exist there. We can't remove non-conformities just because that's part of the general plan that we, or a general aspirational goal. We can't do that without legal standing to do so. The piece in question, I think, has legal standing. If we have to get an official legal opinion on that, maybe we need to do that. But I believe he's established that.
Sorry, what do you mean by legal standing?
Well, legal standing as a non-conforming structure. That it exists. It is considered a legal but non-conforming structure, and as such, it can continue as that. And the way these have been applied in the past, if somebody tears down a piece of a non-conforming structure and chooses to add an appendage in a different way that is legal or conforming, they're allowed to do so, or they're allowed to infill into that envelope. And that's been well established by this commission, and that's the way my understanding is the way it's been interpreted. And I don't see how we've made the argument that this isn't entitled to that same consideration. And I think you can certainly weigh that the bulk of this other existing piece is becoming more conforming, but that doesn't mean that it owes us the tail. Each piece of this has the same standing. We can't parcel a piece of that out. And that's the way we apply this, the way I've seen it applied all over town. That pieces, projects, renovation projects, and we have non-conformances, legal non-conformance situations in town, like this that exist all over the place, and there would be people crying bloody murder if we started removing those. I don't think we have that. I don't think that's one of our choices. I think we do need to decide that this piece has, on its own, has legal standing as a non-conforming, and there is no movement on that. And I don't know if we need to take a straw poll and move on from that point. If somebody else agrees that this thing is moving, tell me now, and tell me how.
Well, we spent a goodly amount of time on this subject. It seems to me that we have on this two outstanding questions. I haven't heard anybody say that they don't think this project's exempt from CEQA. And I haven't heard anybody say, no, we shouldn't grant the demolition permit. The design review on the building and the question of the windows. And it also leaves us with a non-conformance question. So we're halfway home, but I don't think it's a great idea that we spend the next hour debating the two remaining items. So I'm going to suggest at this point, it's time to fish or cut bait on this one way or the other.
Chair, could we have a separate
I would
vote on the
think at this
interpretation
point,
question? Chair, can we?
I would
can we
like
have
to
a
ask the
separate
city
vote?
attorney.
Just so that we can get clear direction, because this will affect more than just this application.
Okay.
That
This
question
is the
might have
first
been
time
brought to the
staff
commission
has
on its own.
seen this one. All right. All right. Even though we're in the midst of rewriting code, and this has been seen once in a blue moon, unless somebody has an objection to that, I don't see anybody objecting to. Could you please take down the sheet, please? It's difficult for me to see what's going on. Thank you. So, unless a member of the commission has objection, sir.
Can we
the
get
public hearings?
Rosaura to opine on it, please?
Well, thank you. If it's part of non-conforming, it's still going to be non-conforming with the new construction. If everything else is being removed except for that little yellow piece of non-conforming structure in the whole project. So I can see where John is coming from, and I can understand what he's saying.
All right. City attorney wants us to take this in two pieces. I have no objections. I don't hear any objections really to taking this in two pieces. So.
Can you define the two pieces, please?
The two pieces, non-conforming would be one. The CEQA finding, the demolition permit, and the design review would be the second piece. That's how I see it. I think that's what the city attorney was interested in saying, correct?
Yes, to be specific, if I were to help write the motion for the interpretation, it would just be that someone moves to adopt an interpretation that the yellow piece is or is not, and that's for you to decide. It doesn't really matter which way the motion is phrased, subject to the non-conforming use rules. I could probably
Okay.
wordsmith that a little more, but I think that would capture the idea.
Is someone willing to?
Wait, before we do
Make
that,
that
does
motion.
everyone who on this commission understand what that means?
I understand what it means to be non-conforming.
If you got a good way of determining that, Dan, I would appreciate it.
Well, it seems to me that what we need to vote upon, and let me see if I can put this in a motion that is actually clear. Let's see. and maybe you can tell me if this sounds right, Todd. I mean, I would craft a motion that says that declares the yellow portion or the portion marked in yellow in the packet is non-conforming and continues as a non-conforming legal structure.
Yes, I would say that it's a motion to declare that the yellow portion or that remnant is a non-conforming building, structure, or other physical feature.
And that it remains such.
That it remains subject to the non-conforming regulations in 17-140-030.
Which allows it to stand and be attached to the new structure.
Could we use buildings instead of structures? Clearly, we're talking about a building here.
I think the yellow portion.
Not the yellow portion, but the rest of it is a building, not a structure.
Yeah, but I'm asking for clarification on what that yellow portion is treated as.
Okay.
Okay. Can I
I
would like.
Let's take the non-conformance issue first. So please, a motion is in order, I believe.
Right. I would move that we consider the piece, noted as the yellow portion or the remnant, and marked as such in the packet, be declared a legal non-conforming building, structure, existing and, well, an existing structure and building, and it would remain a legal non-conforming structure.
Can I ask a question?
Mhm.
Say that the yellow piece remained on the property, everything else was demolished and nothing else was built. Would we consider that what exists on the property a legal non-conforming structure? Yes, okay,
That's the question.
okay.
If I may, that's not entirely the question. Part of the question. Go ahead.
Is there a motion?
I think there was a motion, and you did make that a motion, correct?
I did.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right. Cindy, will you tally the votes, please?
Okay, would you like a roll call?
Yes, please.
Vice Chair Hale,
Yes.
Commissioner Rothfeld,
Yes.
Commissioner Segura,
Sorry about that. No.
Chair Pond.
No. Okay.
No, it's time.
Tie, which means it fails. Now, well, so what's the interpretation here? It failed. So it's a binary choice. Does that mean it's not? Does it fail? Or does that mean there needs to be a motion on whether it isn't? And which that failed too. Todd?
This is where legislating gets messy. If someone would like to make a contrary motion,
But it
See
will
the
fail
record.
as well.
maybe it will. Depends on how you word it.
What the question is, we have one that says yes and it fails. We have one that says no and it fails. What does that do?
Well, the other alternative is to reopen discussion.
Okay. All right. If somebody would care to put an alternative motion on the table? And if not, then it still fails. Do I hear an alternative motion?
Nope.
I am not hearing an alternative motion. All right. Then
Is
I
it-
would suggest that we move
Where's your
on to
fifth
the
cap?
second item, which is, no, because if we get a decision on the second item, then we can come back to the first one if that becomes necessary. The second item is the project exempt from CEQA? Accept the required findings and approve a resolution granting a demolition permit and design review approval. So, is there anyone that cares to make a motion on that piece? Recognizing that we still have no solution on the windows, just a suggestion that with the proponent to work with the neighbors.
It seems pretty clear to me that portion 2 of that recommendation accepts that we have made the determination that the portion in yellow can exist and belong to the new building. Because we're granting, says, resolution granting demolition permit and then design review approval for the proposed demolition and new construction on the property. So I don't see how you can move forward without, defining the yellow piece. I'd be happy to make a motion to determine that the project is exempt from CEQA requirements pursuant to 15.301 and 15.303, but I'm not going to tie it to the second piece until we've nailed down that critical issue. And I think the applicant is entitled to that determination.
All right, let me ask the city attorney again. If there is no other motion, where do we stand? I would suggest the item fails, then if there's no other motion. The only motion we had is one that failed.
Are you talking about just the interpretation question?
Regardless, I think Dan's right that the interpretation question is the hinge question. But if a motion has failed and no other motion is made, it seems to me the item fails.
Can
Because
I
there's
get
no positive resolution.
Can I get the city attorney to clarify? Am I
That's
correct
what I
in,
was asking.
am I correct in understanding by making a motion, which I'd be happy to make motion, including option, items 1 and 2. But by putting item 2 in the motion, does that make that determination in fact?
I'm sorry, I'm a little lost. I'm trying to follow the motion 1,
okay.
the motion 2.
Okay, if motion also includes accept the required findings and approve a resolution granting demolition permit and design review approval for the proposed demolition and new construction on the property located at 1420, 1428 Allen Avenue. By doing that, and I'm happy to make that motion that includes that and the exemption from CEQA, but I just
Okay.
want to make sure it's very clear. In my interpretation of that, that is also weighing in on and accepting that piece that we tried to parcel out.
That's correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Dan, I would suggest you might want to take an amendment to that motion such that the yellow piece gets left out.
Well, but see, I don't believe that, John. I believe that it should be included. And
I know you do.
I'm happy to make that motion and maybe
I know you do,
the
but
alternative, if we're not going to discuss this.
We've had a 2-2. It's not going to pass the other way.
Well, we don't know that, John.
All right. I'm reasonably confident, and there was no motion, by the way, to take it the other way. So as it stands, it has failed.
That individual motion did not pass.
That's correct.
Yes. And all right.
That's why I was
Okay.
asking the city
Can I-
attorney. Let me
Can
reword this.
Can I talk to, I'd like to discuss this with Rosaura and have a discussion on the yellow piece here in advance of making a motion that includes this, the entirety of the staff recommendation. Because it's unclear to me, her statement before, in my view, sort of aligned with the understanding that that piece was not moving and had standing and was non-conforming and remained such. So I'm not convinced that that we aren't actually there. But
So
I'd
is
like
the
to
building
give,
moving?
what's that?
Is the building moving?
No, the building is not moving.
Exactly.
Moving from one building to the next.
No, it is not moving. There is a definition of moving. It is not moving.
You're trading the non-conformance.
The building itself, it's not moving, okay, but it's going to be part of the new building.
Right. The yellow portion,
Yes.
do you agree, Rosaura, with the understanding that the yellow portion exists currently as a non-conforming legal building?
It's been established, yes.
Right. And what would you consider?
It will continue to be a legal non-conforming building.
Correct.
So if we can remedy.
Which is the
I hear what
definition.
you're saying, but non-conforming will still be a part of the new building.
Yes. It will, it is essentially unchanged. It is non-conforming now, it will remain non-conforming. And I believe it has standing to do so. Do you agree with that?
How is that gonna?
Let me say what I believe.
No, go ahead, John.
You have non-conforming building A, right? You're putting up building B and saying, okay, I'm moving the non-conformance from building A to building B.
You're not moving anything, John.
Yes, you are.
No, you are not.
Because if you,
Physically-
yes, you are. If you knock down building B in its entirety, right, your non-conformance is gone. But if you knock down building A
That's not true, John.
in its entirety,
That's not
you
true.
made no change from A to building B. They're independent structures. You're moving your non-conformance from one independent structure to a second non-conforming structure. You're making the second structure non-conforming.
John, I think we've lost track
I don't see.
control of what our goal is here. Because I think if we were going to look at this as a net, that piece of it as a net effect has zero net effect on the neighbor or the applicant in terms of its use. Its use is remaining exactly the same. Its adjacency is exactly the same. That and that is entitled to do so. Every piece of that envelope that exists in what is right now the entirely non-conforming primary building has 100% right to continue to exist. That I don't think that is in question, is it?
No. If
Right.
you, if
I
they.
think we're getting
If the
tied up.
applicant came in and got a demolition permit for the building in the back and didn't proceed to care to label the building in the front 1420 as an ADU, it would have the right to continue to exist as an existing non-conforming structure. That's correct. But
But it would lose the
don't-
benefit of becoming more conforming, which is
But
supposedly also.
no, it doesn't. It doesn't. Conformance isn't a matter of inches. It either is conforming or it's not conforming. That's how our code is written. It's not, you're partially conforming, you're kind of conforming, you're a little bit non-conforming. It's literally, are you conforming? Are you non-conforming?
I disagree. It is.
I see no evidence in the code
Because-
that you can be a
because
little
that-
non-conforming.
What
That,
section is this, John?
I'm 14.140.010 at sec.
it is a matter of inches because every square inch of that existing nonconformity carries along with it an entitled existence. And it's not up to you to take that away or you know, and I think the bigger picture is lost here in this, you know,
The bigger picture here is we have a one-off. This is it. It's a one-off.
It is not a one-off, John, because these
indeed a
exist.
one-off.
These exist.
Dan, please, staff, I asked the question of staff and the answer was yes. Now you're saying it's no. The answer is yes, Dan. I asked that question right off the bat. So with that, we have a one-off. What do we do with it?
Excuse me, can I get planning staff to correct that, please?
Sure, I will say that my comment had to do with attaching the larger structure to an existing non-conforming piece of a building, not that there are not existing non-conforming buildings all over town, because there are existing non-conforming buildings all over town.
And that was the question. They are
And-
existing
and-
non-conforming.
Well, and actually, now that I think about it more, we have had instances where folks have had portions of an existing non-conforming building where they've added on to it, and as long as the addition was meeting the new standards, they were allowed to.
Exactly.
Added on to the same building, correct?
Correct.
This is a different building. So you're starting the clock all over again on a new building. Let me, all right. We've had a motion to consider the yellow part as drawn as acceptable under our non-conformance. That failed. Okay. We opened up the thought of making another motion. There was none made. So being that we had a motion which failed.
I am happy to make that motion.
Unless you're happy to make the motion exactly what?
Yes, I've made it very clear that I'm happy to make that motion. I just wanted to make it very clear to all the other, my fellow commissioners, what that motion means. I don't want to trip into an accidental approval of something. That's why I think the applicant deserves a clear answer on that. I think that the citizens of the city deserve a clear resolution of that. I think precedent in the way that we have handled pieces of buildings that exist that are non-conforming but legal add evidence to this understanding. It may be awkward, and that's kind of the definition of a legal non-conforming situation. That is how, when it becomes over time non-conforming. It was conforming when it was built, maybe based upon that there was very little guideline, but the fact is it exists, and it legally exists with entitlement to remain. So I think Todd is correct in kind of framing it that if you remove the piece that has a right to be converted to an ADU and thereby become conforming and not in our purview, that does not remove the rights of the remaining piece that's marked in yellow.
Let me put it this way. Dan, if the project had been to add 2,000 square foot to the existing 1420 building, we would have been done. Because of an adding to an existing building. That was legal non-conforming. We would have been changing the non-conformance.
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry, can you hear me, John?
Yes.
It might, pardon staff's interruption, it might be worthwhile to ask the applicant if he'd be willing to move forward without that portion or not. That could help things depending on his response.
Well, I hate to get into design, but I think at this point we can certainly ask that. I don't see the city attorney shaking his head no. He's got his thumb up in the air. All right. Let me reopen the public hearing and ask the applicant if under these conditions, which would probably mean a quick approval, no offense, would you be willing to remove the yellow portion of the building from your design? You're on mute, sir. Excuse me, you're still on mute. There, thank you.
Not be a quick approval because I would have to redesign the whole building. So that said, there is no advantage to. I believe that I have the right for the building as designed. If I understood Mr. Ponte's point about the reason for this whole discussion about conforming and non-conforming, may I point out, and you said that the reason behind it is that we don't like to perpetuate non-conforming uses. However, if you look at the history just of this particular project, the
Excuse me, sir. The statement was, I don't like non-conformance moving from one building to the other and thus extending its life.
But you,
So not exactly the same thing, a little different.
but the reason, as I understood it, you gave is that we don't want to perpetuate a non-conforming use. So if we look at the history of the remodel of the front building, we got a permit to do all kinds of things to that building. We put new kitchens in different locations. We put new bathrooms in different locations. We installed the laundry in the garage. And in fact, we have perpetuated the use of this non-conforming building. Now, whether this use moves from one structure to another, not moves, but the use is transferred from one structure to the other structure, doesn't really matter, because in effect, since these two buildings are attached, the whole thing is non-conforming. It's not just this little thing, it is one building. One portion of it, the front portion, is non-conforming. It's attached to the back building, if we want to call it a back building, but it is one structure, as one structure, it is non-conforming. Does that mean that we cannot have another structure on this lot? So if you look at the history of the way the city has been handling these remodels, you will see that the principle of not wanting to perpetuate non-conforming uses has not been the practice in the city. So this is actually what we are doing here. We already perpetuated it for the next 40 years by remodeling the front building. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Close the public hearing. So the answer is no. Sounds like to me.
What? Which, if I can just add, all of this is existing on a non-conforming lot that will continue to be non-conforming.
The lot's non-conforming, the
Yes.
building is non-conforming, and the use is also currently non-conforming. So there's three non-conformances on this lot, the way I count them.
Right. One of those is improving.
Two of them are going away, essentially.
What do you mean going away? Two of those non-conformances, the lot is not changing. Its non-conformance is not
The
changing.
lot's not changing. There's nothing you can do about that.
Right. So
there's nothing to ever be able to do about that. The use would be conforming now, to go from non-conforming to conforming, because you have two houses on a lot, neither one labeled ADU, and no conditional use permit on file. Right? That's non-conformance. One of these would be labeled an ADU. Boom, you're conforming as far as use goes.
So you think the fact that it's now labeled an ADU makes it wholly non-conforming?
No, it's not labeled an ADU. That's what makes it non-conforming. I've just labeled an ADU, as Todd said. It is conforming. It's completely conforming. So once it's labeled an ADU, it's a completely conforming building. So not only are we loaning, if you will, or shifting a nonconformance from one building to the other, we're shifting it at the same time the building we're shifting it from becomes fully conforming. Also seems a little specious, but we'll leave that one where it applies. The point is, the nonconformance is moving from one building to the next. Yes, you could rebuild the pink building 50 times and our rules would allow it. Yes, you could expand the building in another direction and our rules would allow it. I don't see where our rules allow for shifting non-conformance from one building to the next.
Chair and Commission, if I may, it might be helpful to think about the remnant of the currently non-conforming building, not moving from one building to the next, but being associated with one building versus another. The association in my mind changes. Of course, I make my living thinking about words, so maybe I'm splitting hairs, but I've heard many times in this conversation that nothing is moving. Probably thinking about physically moving, I hear the chair speaking about moving, and to me, I hear association, that it's associated with a new building instead of with the old building. For what it's worth, I offer that. I also am looking at 17.140.030, non-conforming buildings or structures. That's where a lot of this conversation centers. I'm looking at paragraph D, as in Delta. I don't think it answers this question, but it might provide the commission with helpful guidance. It seems to be that here the code anticipates that when a non-conforming building structure or physical feature is destroyed, mostly destroyed, that it, or when a portion of it is destroyed, they have a right to retain the non-conforming status. When a greater portion of it, to say the majority, is destroyed or removed, then it only gets to enjoy a non-conforming status if it goes through a more rigorous discretionary process. It's not a matter of right. Like I said, it's not controlling. It's not exactly on point, but it might offer the commission some guidance in terms of what the city code should be interpreted to do when it comes to a remnant of a non-conforming building. How do we want to treat that like a building? If 90% of the non-conforming building remains, what if only 5% of the non-conforming building remains? Does it still enjoy non-conforming status? Are we going to call it a non-conforming building structure or physical feature at that point? Or is there a point at which it's no longer a non-conforming building structure or physical feature? It's just the remnant of something that was. I offer that to see if that helps. If there's a motion, I didn't hear a motion, but if there is a motion to just consider the staff's recommendation as written, I haven't heard a vote on that. You can also continue the item if you need to, and we can maybe figure out a way to bring back the interpretation question divorced from the project and the project details for the full commission to consider if needed.
All right, we have a suggestion from the city attorney on directions to go. Does anyone have a preference? Yes, Dan.
Okay, I would move that we accept the staff recommendation and determine that the project is exempt from the requirements of SEQRA pursuant to section 15301 and section 15303, and accept the required findings and approve a resolution granting demolition permit and design review approval for the proposed demolition and new construction on the property located at 1420, 1428 Allen Avenue.
Do you care to make any additions or changes to that to cover the windows at all?
No, I do
So to
not.
speak? Okay, we have a motion on the floor to accept the staff findings as written. Do we have a second to that?
I would second, but with the contingency that the window has to be obstructed in some way. That's
you can suggest that he takes a friendly amendment, but you either second it or you don't.
Oh, I'll suggest a friendly amendment.
Dan?
No, thank you. Because I think it's actually pretty important that if if we wanted to talk about obscured glass, that responsibility would be on the Ellises, not on the applicant. Because the onus is upon them to preserve their privacy. Their expectation of this piece next door staying exactly the same is not based, has no support in code. And I think we've flawed, erred on that understanding very often, and given oxygen to a really inaccurate and not an understanding that doesn't, I believe, have legal standing when we give oxygen to that argument. I think it's important that we do make clear to folks in town that the way to be a good neighbor is to work together, is to come to that conclusion on themselves, amongst themselves, without aid of us, coercing one side or the other. That, I think some attempts of that were made, and that may even continue, but I don't think I think by adding that Mr. Caloyannidis, obscure his window, gives the Ellises' right more weight than his, which I don't think we can do. I don't think that's legal. I don't think it's correct. I don't think it's right. When the Ellises chose to build their addition, they took it upon themselves to have whatever effect and dwarf the building that was next to them on the lot that exists on the back of Mr. Caloyannidis' lot, which they had a right to do. And I understand that it's difficult for neighbors to do this, but I don't think we do town a service by feeding that notion that if you can marshal the neighbors against something, if you can demand this or demand that in ways that are not supported by code, I think that is not the way to a more healthy dynamic. I think the way for a more healthy dynamic would be for a consistent demonstration by city officials, by staff, by planning staff, to explain the concept that each and every parcel and property in town has not what exists as an envelope, as a built envelope, but has an envelope that's defined by code. And that is your expectation to privacy. And you, as soon as you own it, are entitled and responsible to affect what you can affect, on your property. And I think I can't support the idea of coercing Mr. Caloyannidis or supporting the Ellises' rights in a stronger way than Mr. Caloyannidis, just because he's making this application now.
Okay, with that, Marika, do you care to withdraw or go forward with your second?
Well, I actually do think that the code, as Todd pointed out, does give us a vehicle to assess whether the window is compatible with the design of the building. So I don't think it's legally baseless. I don't know another vehicle that the Ellises can use to fight is a strong word, but to express their dissatisfaction with their right of privacy being.
We've been in this a couple hours. Can we get to the chase? Are you?
Yeah, I
withdraw
rescind
your
my
second,
second.
or go
Yes,
forward with it?
withdraw.
All right, we have a motion. Apparently, we do not have a second. Do we have an alternative motion? Which would be to deny.
Chair, if I may,
Please.
It takes an affirmative action of the commission to approve the project. If a motion is made to approve the project and the motion fails, no action is taken. And it amounts to a denial.
Can you say that again, Todd? I blanked out here for a second.
That often happens with attorneys. When an attorney is speaking, people tend to glaze over.
No, it says right now your internet connection is unstable. So
That's what my wife says all the time. No, I was just merely pointing out that when an applicant is seeking an approval, it takes an affirmative action of the body, the legislative body, to approve the application, the project. So if a motion is made and the motion fails, a motion is made to approve and the motion fails, that is no action and no approval. Essentially, it's a denial.
Okay.
A failure
So
to
we have a
approve is a
decision.
denial.
correct?
Yes, yes.
Fail to approve is a denial.
Yeah,
We have
it's
a
not final in
fail
the
to
sense,
approve.
it's not final in the sense that someone else can make an alternative motion to approve that might be a little different. But if no motion to approve is adopted by the majority, it does fail. And a failure to be approved is a denial.
I did ask if there was another motion on the floor, didn't hear one. Is there another motion on the floor? Going, gone. All right, I believe this item is complete. City Attorney's interpretation is it has been not approved. So that puts us to item 6, scheduled matters. I don't believe we have any. That takes us to item 7, department reports. Director DeRosa, do you have anything for us tonight?
Yes, thank you. There's going to be a meeting next week, or excuse me, in 2 weeks. So please have that on your calendar. And we'll be following up about SB 9 with a director's report.
Okay. Besides SB 9 and SB 8, is there anything else we need to think about?
Well, we have a lot of other projects going on right now, as you know, so we have to make it all work together.
Okay. Agenda forecast. This is also the time when a commissioner could ask for an item to be placed on a future agenda. Do we have any of those? I don't see any hands going up again. In the meantime, a list of all current planning projects is available on the city website. And on a personal note, I would like to thank you all for working hard on this item. I don't think we actually came to a conclusion, but we did work hard on it. Except for a TKO here, we didn't come to any conclusion at all, but thank you. And I believe with that, the meeting is adjourned.
Good night, all. Thank you.